Hi writers! I'm Alyssa Hollingsworth, the author of The 11th Trade, and today I want to talk to you about things I like to know about my characters before I actually start writing them. If that first sentence didn't tip you off, I am a huge plotter. I love to plot. Some of this might not apply to all of you. I know some really good writers who cannot imagine putting this type of information down before they've started to write a scene. That's really cool. Adapt whatever I say and make it work for you. One of the things I do like to keep in mind is that even though I'm a plotter and a perfectionist, I don't have to actually keep all this stuff accurate throughout the story. I was just looking at one of my old journals for my second book, which is The Invisible Boy, and almost nothing on the first draft of my character sheet is still accurate now that I'm in draft 4 of the manuscript. Let things move as you explore the story. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. You're brainstorming this information. None of it has to remain the same. It's just a fun way to creatively play with what might happen in your book. In a different video, I'm going to be talking about how to organize this and put it into your author journal. So we're not going to go into that here. We're just going to talk about what the information is and what I like to do with it. For the purposes of these videos, I have made up a story that's like my fake work in progress, which is a retelling of The Maiden with No Hands, which is a Grimm's fairy tale that I found on Google. So that way I can tell you all the details of how my thought process works in a way that I can't do with my past or current projects that are already sold to publishers. This is all imaginary, but if anybody likes the ideas, I think that a retelling of The Maiden with No Hands would be really cool. The first things that I like to have when I begin are what my character looks like, which is often a picture of a person that I found on the internet, and I like to have their names. When I'm organizing the journal, and in that video, when I'm putting it all together, I will go into more detail about how I find these things. But right now we're just going to assume that you already have a name for your character and you kind of know what they look like. So we're going to focus on some other stuff. All right, so let's get into it. Other than name and picture, I like to know their age. Chances are that if you're writing YA, you'll probably say 17, 18. And since this is a YA fantasy, I'm going to say that Nest is 17. I then like to know about their birthday. And to be honest, I don't look at this again. Probably ever. I like to know just generally if the character is born in spring or fall or winter, that sort of thing. For Nest, we're going to go ahead and just say May 4th. Now, because this is YA fantasy, I'm not going to put a year, but in my middle grade contemporary, I do like to put exact years because that helps me just think about what was going on when my character was born. And then after that, I like to think about race. And we're just going to be really boring and say that Nest is white. She's white and she has black hair. After that, I like to think about their Myers-Briggs type. There's a free quiz online that's called 13 Personalities. I recommend that you take it for yourself first, just so you have a baseline. I am an INFJ. My characters rarely end up being the same type as me. For Nest, what I have is ENFJ, because I wanted her to be kind of similar, but actually extroverted, because to her, relationships are going to be really, really important. And that's one of the things she's going to have to overcome her fears to embrace. Then I like to think about the sorting hat. So which Harry Potter house would they be placed in? This helps me begin to define what their values are and how they might react with other different types of people. I personally am a Hufflepuff, and I admit that I have a lot of Hufflepuff characters. Nest, I think, is actually a Gryffindor. So then I find it helpful to think about one word that sort of encapsulates this character. So one theme that is them, that's their thing. For example, with Nest, I'm going with the word resilient. So in the original fairy tale, what happens is the main character, the milliner's daughter, her dad cuts off her hands because the devil tells him to, basically. Then she goes on sort of a quest to figure out who she is. So I think that someone who has had their father cut off their hands and then kind of goes on an adventure would be a very resilient person. That's the word we're going to go with. I then like to just define the story role. This should be a pretty straightforward one, but it helps sometimes, so just write it down. With Nest, obviously she's my main character, so she's going to be my protagonist. Other options you would have would be antagonist, romantic interest, best friend, sidekick, all of that sort of thing. Then I like to go really old school, really basic writing advice. What does she want, need, and fear? Wants are the things that the character thinks that they have to have. Need is what they actually really need to have in order to grow as a person. And fear is that barrier that's going to be between the want and the need. So in my case, I think if your hands were chopped off by your father, you would probably have a really hard time trusting other people. What she wants is to be invulnerable, to just not have to need anyone and be independent. Part of it is that the want doesn't need to be like a bad thing. And in fact, you want it to be somewhat sympathetic because you want your reader to want what the character wants. What my character needs, I think, is to learn to trust and love again, and to kind of figure out how she can be safe, but also not cut herself off from everyone else. Fun fact, this is a common theme in almost all of my books. And at the core of them, they're about the power of community and how people can help people. No surprises, same thing here. She needs to learn how to love and how to let other people love her. And then she fears, obviously, being vulnerable. She doesn't want to be in a position where she's unsafe and where someone else has the power to hurt her. In order to get to her need, which is to grow as a person and learn to love again and let other people love her, she's going to have to get past her fear, which is to let other people love her and to love people and be vulnerable. So that's kind of a nice setup for a good character arc, I think. Up next, I like to think about character voice. Voice is a mysterious beast that's very hard to explain or pin down, but I find it helpful to put down a few words about how I think that this person will sound. For Nest, I've been really vague and artsy, and I've just said that I think she sounds kind of like a river would sound. By which I mean she sounds poetic and thoughtful, and she takes things a little bit slow sometimes, but if things build up, she does things very fast. For a different example, my main character in my second book, The Invisible Boy, Nadia, wants to be a reporter. She wants to be just like Lois Lane, and she uses very quippy language. I also like to think about similar characters or people. So people who remind me of this character I'm creating. And I like to mix it up with a couple of real-life characters and also some fictional characters across mediums. Nest, I think, is a bit like Rapunzel in Disney's Tangled. I could also see her being like Arthur Clement in Little Dorrit, or Faramir in Lord of the Rings. Often with a character that I'm actually putting together, I do try to think about people in real life, not because I want to copy them specifically, but I like to blend a little bit about my questions about real people into what I'm wondering about this character and explore that. It just helps me dig a little deeper. I also like to think about their appearance or dress, and I admit that I have in the past made actual style guides for my characters. Sometimes it's more important than other times. My main character in the 11th Trade, Sammy, I really didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what he was wearing. But my main character in The Invisible Boy, Nadia, loves crazy leggings, and that was one of the first things I knew about her. With Nest, her wardrobe is very basic. Neutral color, very understated, with a little bit of blues, and I would have her slowly begin to wear more blues and brighter blues towards the end of the story as she kind of comes into her own again. Then I like to write backstory. I like to keep this as brief as possible. We're talking like a few sentences. If you need more room, go write it somewhere else. For right now, for this character sheet, just keep it short and sweet. My backstory I've written for Nest, I'm actually not sure if it would be the beginning of where the story would pick up if it was a manuscript, or if I would keep this in the backstory and begin with Nest already on her quest. Haven't thought about it that much. Just made up this character like in 30 minutes. So it doesn't matter at this point, it doesn't matter. But the backstory is, and I've based this a little bit off of the fairy tale, that she's a milliner's daughter. And in my version, she has water elemental powers. Then what happens is somebody comes to town and he's like, man, I want those elemental powers. And he's like, hey, Dad, I'll pay you so much money if you would cut off your daughter's hands and give them to me. And Dad is like, cool, that seems legit. That's what happens. And then she runs away and goes off on her quest. Because this is a Grimm's fairy tale, if she finds her hands again, maybe she can like get them back and be whole again and have her powers back again. So that's my backstory. I also like to think about their values. What is important to them? And for Nest, I think probably beauty, calm, and relationships. And part of the ways that I get to that is I'm like, what are things that she's going to have a really hard time finding in this story I've set her up in? And those are all things that she's going to have a really hard time finding in the story that I've put her in. I also like to think about hate. And for Nest, I've written down brutality and greed, because obviously. Then I like to think about the character's favorite place. In some of my books, this has actually led to a really interesting scene where you get to put it in their favorite place and then have conflict come into it. It's very fun. For Nest, I'm saying fresh water. She likes to be up to her knees in fresh water. That's when she feels most like herself. I also like to think about favorite possession. Sometimes this can be a really significant part of your story. Sometimes it's less significant. For Nest, we're going to go with just a necklace with glass orb that has some water in it. And I don't really know why that's important to her, but that's what she said was important. I also like to know their favorite pastime. This could be the thing that they do to make them feel like themselves again. And for Nest, we're going to go with doing her magic. So then I think about the lie the character believes. This is something that I've taken from K.M. Whelan. She's an amazing writing blogger, and I will link to it below. This is the thing that the character believes that the story has to prove is untrue. So for me, Nest believes that if she can get her hands back, then she'll be whole again. And in the course of this story, she's got to find out that that's not actually how she's going to be whole again. So the next two things that I like to put on my character sheet are really something that could be a video all on their own. So I'm just going to briefly summarize it here, and then maybe I'll make another video going in depth about it later. The plot question and the narrative question. The plot question is asking what will happen to your character in the story. And it should be the question that a reader is asking themselves as they read, what's going to happen? For my story, I have, will Nest survive? And the answer to that is yes. Spoiler, she will survive. Yay, I like happy endings. And a narrative question is, how is your character going to change in the course of this story? Who are they going to become? What are they going to overcome? I have, will she find safety? And I chose this specifically because I think a more obvious one would be, will she fall in love? Which is a fair enough narrative question, that's good. But I always like to have my plot and narrative questions answers have like something a little bit interesting about them. I don't know if it shows in the story or not, but it makes me more interested. So, will she find safety? The answer is yes, but not the way she thinks. She thinks that she's going to find safety by finding her hands, and that's not how it's going to happen. And then I like to have a logline. So a logline is basically just a sentence summarizing the character. So for mine, I have, Nest is a young woman who has been deeply hurt, but has to learn how to be herself without sacrificing relationships. I also like to do something I call arc lines. An arc line takes what you've already written down, which is the wants, needs, and fears, and then kind of puts it in a concise statement that helps you think about how the conflict in your story is going to evolve. The basic formula for this is, character can only become what she needs to be when she gives up what she most wants and faces what she fears. So it's kind of a Mad Lib, just fill in the blank. For mine, I have, Nest can only be whole when she gives up what she most wants, being invulnerable, and faces what she most fears, which is trusting or loving others. The last thing that I like to have on my character sheet is a list of the different arcs that are going to happen in the story. And there's tons of different ways to look at arcs or acts or whatever you want to call it. Some people split it into 8, some people split it into 5, some people split it into 3. For this level of brainstorming, I like to go ahead and just split it into 3. And the basic way that this works is Act 1 is, who is the character right now? Act 2 is, who is the character becoming? And Act 3 is proving what we learned in Act 2. Again, this could be a whole nother video. Until then, I will link down to a lecture by Doug Tenable that just really briefly encapsulates this idea, and I think is very clear, and it definitely revolutionized the way that I was thinking about plot. For my story, in Act 1, Nest has her hands stolen and she goes on a quest to get them back. In Act 2, Nest discovers that she's still powerful and can still use magic without her hands, and that actually she's stronger with the help of other people. In Act 3, Nest accepts a gift from her romantic interest that helps her fully embrace the new identity that she has. In the original fairy tale, he gives her silver hands. So my headcanon is that her romantic interest has silver powers. Like, that's his elemental thing that he can control. And so he makes magical hands that are pretty well functioning for her. So there you have it. That is all the information I like to have on my character sheet. And you can check out the other video to see how I set it all up, like so. Until then, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up below, leave a comment, and hit subscribe, I guess. That's the thing people do. Keep writing. I'll see you next time.